What is up, everybody? Welcome back to the Debbie Row YouTube channel. We're back with another top 25 series. We are diving in close. We're in the top 15 now. We got the number 15 Utah Utes. What can we expect from this team that went 10-4 last year, won another Pac-12 championship, made another Rose Bowl, came up a little short? We're going to be diving into their roster. What does it look like? Is Cam Rising going to actually play? And what's behind him if he doesn't? We'll be diving into all of that: defense, offense, transfers, recruits, schedule, even kickers on this episode. So keep it here, hit that like and subscribe button, and we will dive into it on the other side. All right, let's get into Utah, man. We're excited. Let's get into the talk about these guys. Kyle Whittingham is one of the best coaches in college football. This dude's always got these guys ready to play. Last season, they were 11th in points per game. They upset USC. They knocked USC out of the playoff, and that should have been, I'm sure with USC going to the Big Ten after this year, that was definitely a big get for them in terms of what they wanted to do and accomplish there. They have a chance for a third straight Pac-12 title this year. They do return 14 starters. But there's a lot more question marks now than there were before. So let's get into it. Let's kind of talk about that offensive line, and that's really where it starts with the question marks.
Yeah, they're returning three of their starters, and I think you're encouraged about the guys behind what they were able to do when they got on the field. So Falcon at left tackle, and I'm gonna mess up these names. I'm so sorry, but Fayu at center. Those are the two new guys on this offensive line, and the center play was really good when he was on the field. Now it was only in 5 games. I think you'd like to see more sample size to really determine that. But like you said, Whittingham's a good coach, and I think that he gets the best out of his players either way. I think you can kind of rely on this offensive line improving, with three guys returning, but also just, maybe taking a step forward as pass blockers, because I think
Yeah.
that was kind of their downfall last year.
Yeah, and Jim Harding is one of the best offensive line coaches in the country, and he's been talking about this group. And he said, "Hey, like when he's asked, hey, who stood out to you?" He said, "Well, no one. We're all busting our butts." That's coach talk right there. But I do think they got to develop. I think the biggest thing is I think Harding even talked about it this spring. He said, "Hey, we had pretty good depth last year, but no one really stepped up as being our one guy." And talking about like, hey, they need some guys to come in there and develop. So this is one area that you got to see. Okay, where's that offensive line at? How are they going to develop, and where does that look like? And then overall, when you're looking at the roster, I think that one, obviously the biggest strength for Utah, which has been kind of their strength for a while, is the running back room. Like, so Jaquindon Jackson has kind of stepped up. He's kind of transitioned from that quarterback, like kind of hybrid wildcat guy to that running back position. He kind of came on strong last year. He finished with 500 yards. He's a big one. Like, we're talking about big guy ready to kind of step up and be that guy. Then, Micah Bernard is really good. Jalen Glover, Chris Curry. And I will say this, going through our manifesto that we write, the one name I kept hearing because he got all the reps in the spring based on injuries was Jalen Glover. They love this kid. He's a small guy, 5'7", 205, but they said that he showed out good athleticism, toughness. Really, because of Cam Rising's injury, and we don't know if he's going to be healthy. There's so many rumors going on. Twitter, Cam Rising's going out there. They're going to have to really lean on that running back room, and that's really going to be their key early on in the season.
Yeah, I think Jaquindon's going to lead this backfield. He was absolutely fantastic last year. I think he's a main reason. This Utah offense finished third in the country per Pro Football Focus in run grade. They were a fantastic football team when they were running the football. A lot of that was on the back of Jaquindon Jackson. But like you said, the depth behind him is really, really good too. Those returning starters were all very good run blockers. And so I think you're going to see a similar type of blueprint for wins for them. The difference, though, having Cam Rising out there last year, especially in that USC game that you mentioned, and some of those big games,
Oh, yeah.
that mattered. He is a gamer when it comes to those big time performances or those big time games, and I think depending on when he gets back on the field, I do think that he plays this year. But depending on when he gets back onto the field, I think there could be a little bit, a few more bodies in the box and things like that could maybe slow this rushing attack down. But overall, I mean, you've got to be happy about having Jaquindon Jackson with what he put on tape last year.
Yeah, and the question comes down: if Rising isn't ready to go, it's between Nate Johnson and Brandon Rose. It seems like Brandon Rose is probably going to get in that job. As a three-star kid out here in Marietta Valley High, he did throw for 7,500 yards and 74 touchdowns, and that's nothing to like really sneeze at. And he's been there. He was also an early enrollee coming out, so he's definitely got that. In a word that I cannot stand, but they said he's got swagger, and whatever the case may be, he's got that out there. He's talked about him being athletic, drop back passer, arm talent off the chart. He's a little different than Cam, though. I don't know if he's going to have that dual threat stuff that we've seen. But if it's him, especially against Florida, first game of the year, I think that's going to be their question mark to see how well they did do that. Going forward, notable losses: Tavion Thomas, Braden Daniels, Paul Malai, sorry, he went to BYU, so you guys don't care if I get his name wrong. Dalton Kincaid as well. Obviously Kincaid is going to be there, but when we're talking about Kincaid, Kincaid was a very, very solid prospect for them, their best receiver last year, but he started the year as tight end too. And, Brant Keithy is still there. So when we're talking about Kincaid, you got to remember that, first round pick was technically their tight end too on the depth chart. So that's something to know. Like he was a big loss. He's obviously a huge loss for them, but they do have talent in that tight end room.
Yeah, and this is an offense that does like to use two tight ends. So even when he was the tight end too, he was still out there. I
Oh
think
yeah.
having Keithy makes you feel good. Like that's your best pass catcher. I think. When we didn't really talk about that wide receiver room, but I think that they're going to be relying on Keithy like they have in the past to be kind of that primary target. After that, I do wonder what that tight end room looks like for that tight end 2 position. We've got Manir McLean slotted in to be the tight end 2 on the manifesto, but there's a flurry of guys kind of competing for that spot. I think that is where you'll feel the Dalton Kincaid loss the most, is actually with the tight end 2.
Yeah, and Tavion Thomas wasn't necessarily a loss.
Sure.
There,
Yeah.
those guys got real guys behind him there. When you're talking about the recruits, so Utah's a top. Hey, he's recruiting very well. Top 25 class again. I think the director of player personnel, Robert Blechin should get kind of a shout out there. Spencer Fano's coming in. He's coming as a top 7 offensive tackle. Caleb Lomo again, top 14 offensive tackle there. Dallin Bentley. So when you're talking about who's coming next for that tight end room, he was technically, Dallin Bentley was the position number one tight end. So when you think of that, like they're getting those guys coming in there. We know we've talked about John Randall Jr. We've heard his name a lot. 6'1", 185. There are some guys that really like him out of Wichita. Top 25 at his position as well. So they did do a pretty good job of getting some guys in here. You have to love the inside out build. Roger Adelman as well. So you've seen that. Like they did a pretty good job here. Matt Coward also, I think from the quarterback perspective, I like Max 6'2", 185. He's a developer based on that room that they have here, but overall pretty good.
Yeah, you like the 2 offensive tackles. I think that's the main thing that stands out. And then John Randall Jr., like you said, we've heard his name a little bit. I think that's a guy that when the rest of that running back room kind of departs, probably a couple, 1 or 2 of them maybe after this year, that's one of those like next
Yeah.
up type of guys. So
Yeah.
good
But I
class.
mean, you could tell running back, running back, running backs. You can see what they like to do here.
Hmm.
When we're talking about kind of getting out in that field and really, really developing there. You got to like that. Now, when we dive into the key transfers, overall, Landon King from Auburn, interesting piece there. Micah Pittman's probably the big one. Emory Simmons as well is out there from Indiana. And then Cole Becker, transfer kicker. And you guys might laugh about the transfer kicker being on here. But Utah, this is one of those things there. And they talked about it actually, place kicking kickoffs have been a mess the last 2 seasons they talked about. So they actually went out and got Colorado kicker Cole Becker. They say, hey, we really want you. And all case may be, that's going to be their guy there. But Micah Pittman's just a guy that's never really took off. Oregon, Florida State. He's a really solid run blocker, though. And that's not a knock because you know what? Utah wants to run. So that is kind of a solid in his profile for him.
Yeah, I mean, I think that's what gets him some more snaps, right?
Yep.
They're going to be running the ball. I think there's a chance that he starts in that slot role. I don't think when they're on passing downs, that's the guy that they want out there. But overall, a fine transfer class. I think they filled some needs, but nothing that like knocks your socks off at all.
No, nothing too crazy there. Impact players. I mean, it's Cam, right? I mean, Cam Rising is going to be their guy. If he's healthy, he's going to be the one to go. He went toe to toe with Caleb Williams last year, and you could say what you want, but he did. They won that twice. They beat him twice. 3,000 yards there. I think Jaquin is going to have a big year. Brant Keithy. These are the guys. If these guys roll, then they're going to be just fine. If they have those auxiliary pieces stepping in, they're gonna win some ball games.
Yeah. Jaquinnon's the dude. I'm all in on Jaquinnon. I really want to see him become one of the best backs in the nation, and I think that he kind of has a skill set that NFL teams are going to like too. So hopefully they get him for more than just this year. But I kind of think he's heading to the NFL after this year. Cam Rising, I think, will be out of eligibility if I'm correct.
Yeah, he should be.
He should be. Eligibility is weird with the COVID stuff, but I think this is kind of like a last hurrah for this iteration of the offense. Keithy also will be gone, so
Yeah.
yeah, this is the group. This is the core that will make this offense go.
Yep, and it would be remiss not to talk. Mikey Matthews, true freshman. They've talked about him really, 5'10", 185, being kind of that guy. Let's go over the defensive side of the ball. So we're talking, Utah defense. Usually we're talking about a very solid piece there. They did lose some guys in their cornerback room. They kind of did go after some transfers, so we saw that. Opponents' points per game, they were a top 27 team there, so you saw that as well. But they did struggle. They, losing the Penn State, against some high-powered offenses there. They did struggle there, but again, they're able to keep off, USC and do those type of things. So what do we have returning here?
I actually wanted to start with what they're losing, because we'll talk about it on the notable losses thing too, but you can't talk about this defense without talking about Clark Phillips.
Yeah.
Clark Phillips was one of the best corners in all of college football last year. Size be damned, but how they replace him is something that I'm actively watching. I think uh, Zemiah Vaughn is one of those guys that could step in. I think they like to Travis Broughton as well, but there's a hole there now because Clark Phillips allowed them to do a lot of different things on defense. I think they're hoping that Vaughn is that dude, but I think when you look at the construction of this defense, they have a lot of returners. There's a lot of experience in this room, but Clark Phillips made that stuff happen. And so I'm kind of hoping that Vaughn can take that next step and be that guy, but it's certainly the biggest question mark I have about this defense.
Yeah, and I think they know that. Like when you're going through all the stuff, especially the Desert News or Desert News or whatever they talk about it, they do a great job at BYU and Utah. They were talking about this being one of those groups that's really a mix of veterans and young talent for Whittingham, but it's not usually like that. Usually they have a lot of veteran guys out there, and you're going to see a different type of defense out there, where they hope that the depth hits. Like I think that's the biggest one. And then really like Lander Barton, these other guys out there, if that depth can hit, then they're going to be talking about it. Notable losses, yeah. You talk about Clark Phillips, Andrew Matafa, Tyler Williams, Mason Tufaga too. He was pretty good overall, but the key in this room was Clark Phillips and what they can replace him with. I think that's the biggest thing, and I think you hit it on the head there.
Yeah, another one, Mohamed Diabate. I think he made it to the NFL. He transferred in, I think, last year, maybe the year before, but he was a fantastic pass rusher for them. Replacing that is going to be a key thing for this defense as well.
Yeah. All right, let's get over to the recruits. So when you talk about recruits here, again, I think they did a good job of kind of filling needs. CJ Blocker is really good. He's a number 12 at his position, cornerback, out of Texas. Smith Snowden as well. So you're thinking of that, a top 20 guy. So they did know they had to kind of go after that secondary and go target that. Owen Chambliss, some of these other guys here. Probably the guy that I want to point out, Hunter Clegg from Utah. 6'4", 235. You could see him right there in the picture there. Edge kid, signed letter of intent, ready to go. Again, some of these guys with, missions and other stuff going on there, you don't know when you're going to get out there. But Hunter Clegg, I know, was a big piece of this room that they really like there. They has growth, needs to put on some weight, does those type of thing. But they love his knee bend. They talked about his flexibility, they like his attacks. They love kind of a pass rusher, a true pass rusher. So he's someone to watch.
Yeah, I think, there is room for some snaps on that defensive line. I think he could work his way onto the field. But I just want to talk about the overall recruiting class, on both sides of the ball. Fantastic job. I think they've been doing a really good job over the last couple of years. But this one stands out as, like, you see the path for some of these guys to be massive impact players in 2 to 3 years. and that's kind of going to hit when USC and UCLA are gone. So
Yeah.
this is the time to go attack, and I think they did a fantastic job in hitting the recruiting trail.
Yeah, no, they did, and they recruit. Utah's great at this. They really go out and get guys. So when you're looking at the recruiting class and where they came from, by state, Utah, California, even Hawaii, Florida, Texas, they have pipelines throughout the country. Like they national recruiters. Like Utah has done a good job. The NIL collective there has done a good job keeping these guys in house. Because remember, I think it was Kincaid, right? That Alabama went after, and they
Yep.
wanted him, and they kept him. So they are doing a good job of keeping them in house. Key transfers here, overall, not big movers, but Britton Allen could be a big one from USC safety. Miles Battle, again, thinking Ole Miss cornerback. We talked about Ole Miss on our last episode. 6'4", 203, comes in as a 4-star kid. He, again, those could be those guys that we talk about as like stepping up for that. BYU, Logan Fano, so they got an edge, that 4-star again. So I think they're definitely going that. And to your point about that defensive line, they had talked about that defensive line really struggled last year. And there was times where even on the Cover 3 podcast, they were talking about they just didn't know what they wanted from that defensive line, and they really need that veteran leadership and to step up. You get Logan there now. You get some other guys in this room from these transfer portals, and then Levani Damuni, he's from Stanford, 4-star kid as well. They went out and got 4-star kids ready to fit in on this defense.
Yeah, and I think that's one of those things where you mix those guys in with some of the returners, and I think there will be some position battles as we head into the fall. That projected starters depth chart that we have right there. I don't think that's final with
No.
some of these guys coming in and challenging some of these guys to get on the field. So good job in the transfer portal. Definitely hit their needs really heavily, but didn't go out and get just a ton of dudes. Got the guys that I think they desired and kind of need to fill in roles on that defense.
Yeah, and they get it. They understand. Remember, this is the 2-time Pac-12 champions. Like we're talking about, like USC being gone. Like they know what what they need to do to win in this conference. Impact players, I think Cole Bishop should be on there. I do think that he can step up there. Lander Barton to me probably stands out the most. I think he's got a ton of high expectations there. His dad played football and baseball at Utah, and I believe his mom was a basketball player there. So he's got that bloodline going on there. 6'4", 236. I think he could step up, be that kid. If he can step up and be kind of that leader on that defense, as a freshman, he had 46 tackles, 8 tackles for loss, 4.5 sacks. He's their dude. If Lander can kind of step up and be that solidifying piece now, he a year removed for freshman year can kind of be that solid guy. Lander's the guy that I really like on this defense.
Yeah, I think when we mentioned Devin Lloyd actually on the last episode, I think, but I think they're looking for a guy that can fill that Devin Lloyd role for
Yeah.
them. I think that's something that they were missing. Diabate had a different type of role for them. I think if Barton can be that anchor in the middle of that defense, that was massive for that defense 2 years ago. And so I think, yeah, that's the guy that I think has to step up. Impact players for this defense. Some guys are going to step up. I think Bishop. I think Sione Vaki is another guy that could be one of those impact players on the backside of that secondary. Where, like I said, you lose Clark Phillips, you need something to kind of make up for that. I think the two safeties together can kind of help with that. But yeah, overall, looking at Lander Barton for sure. But yeah, this is. Some of these guys have to step up. I'd really like for it to be these four right here.
Yeah, and if Van can do it, Van was leading the team in sacks last year until he suffered that season-ending injury. So he had 18 tackles and 5 sacks at that point. So he was getting after it. If those guys can stay healthy, they can go back to the Pac-12 championship. Like that is just how good they are. And I think with Barton and Villinger and those guys, when we're looking at the schedule overall, it's a schedule. It's a brutal one. So you got Florida at home though. So Utah does not lose at home. They just don't. Like when you're looking at their schedules and what they've been able to do, especially in the Pac-12, they don't lose at home. That's going to be a big game. Florida's kind of going through a transition period. We talked about Florida already. They can get that game. If Cam Rising playing, they'd be the favorites. I don't know if Cam's not going to play. That's the question. Baylor, Weaver State, UCLA, Oregon State, Cal, USC, Oregon, Arizona State, Washington, Arizona, Colorado. They've got a tough stretch in there. And so when you're looking at the schedule overall, if they can start the year off like 3-0 going to UCLA, I think that would be a good start for them. What do you think?
I think it's tough. I think we talked about Florida a couple weeks ago now. I don't know, close to that, a week ago. I don't know. That's a team that I think could sneak up on them. I think Utah's probably going to be gunning for them in a massive, massive way. Baylor, to me, though, I think a lot of chips are going to be pushed into that Florida game, and then that Baylor game could sneak up on you as well. Dave Aranda always has his guys ready to play. It's at Baylor. Those two games, if they get through that and they head to UCLA undefeated, I think that there's a chance that they go on a little run there until they hit USC. I think USC is probably at home going to take that one. The Oregon game at home to me is a big one. I think that could determine who is playing in that Pac-12 championship, and then at Washington, kind of the same vibe there too. So, yeah, it's what's their over under? I did not look that
It's
up
eight and a
before we
half.
started.
It's 8.5.
Yeah, that's tough. And I mean, I think there are a lot of things that have to go their way, right? I think if Cam Rising plays half the year, you're looking at probably an additional 1 to 2 losses in that first half of the year. If he plays the full year, I think you can hit the over. Um, I think that's the stipulation. I wouldn't be betting this confidently right now with that uncertainty with Cam Rising.
No, and I think, and it depends on the book that you see, because there's 8.5, there's 9 out there. And I think that's where you have to really kind of see kind of where it's at. I think 8 is a number for them, and Utah fans, you can come yell at me, and when I'm wrong, when they go 4-0 to start the year, 5-0, you can come get me. I think that I'm going to just predicate that with this. I'm going to kind of temper expectations. If Cam Rising doesn't start, I think it's under 9. Like, I think that their win total would be 8. Like, if Cam's not out there, I like, if Rose steps up and he's that guy, then maybe. But if Cam's out there and he's healthy, then yeah, I think they can go back to the Pac-12 title game. I think that's really what it relies on, is that quarterback play there. But again, I want to see him play Colorado Dion, that last game of the year. What are they going to put on Dion there? And you got to remember too, the Pac-12 is just taking the top 2 teams now. They got rid of the division, so it's just the top 2 teams in the conference. So that gives Utah a little bit of, they can get in again if they have a couple oopsies, and they kind of, if I think the Pac-12 is going to eat each other alive in this conference. So Utah could still get in with a 3 losses and still win another Pac-12 championship. I think that's always in their play there. All right, let's go over the outlook. I think overall, if they're healthy, I think it's going to be there. It'll be interesting to see what Utah does overall. After this season, if they stay in the Pac-12, where are the conferences they're going to go to? But if they do stay in the Pac-12, based on the recruiting classes and everything there, they are going to be contenders for a long time.
Yeah, I think, this season is very determined by Cam Rising. I think this could be one of those like transition seasons, though. And then when you talk about a transition season combined with that good class, combined with some of those guys that we talked about being younger guys and impact players, you could be looking at consistent Pac 12 championships. So, even Utah fans, even if you don't get it this year with this loaded Pac 12, because it is very much so loaded this year, I think you have to feel good about where this program still is sitting. I remember last year, Kevin, we talked about heading into that first game. They were going to Florida. That was such a tough game. And honestly, like, they kind of shattered our expectations. We were talking about Oregon, we were talking about UCLA, we were talking about USC as these Pac-12 favorites, and Utah is the one that steps up out of there. They always seem to do that with what seems like lesser talent. They're a well-coached team. They're a well put together program. So I think you're happy with that.
Yeah, betting against the Kyle Whittingham team is not something I like to do. So it's gonna be tough. We'll see how it goes. They want revenge, though. Go take revenge. From Florida. You deserve that win last year. But we'll see you guys next time on our next edition of the Top 25 Breakdown.